And now, on This Week in History with Paul Waite.
On This Week in History, and it is Paul Waite, and Paul Waite is wearing one of Callum's favourite shirts, not. If Callum had his way, I would wear black everything, and probably have a mask over my face. But instead, I'm wearing a debut of a wonderful shirt I got from America, which is, how would you describe it, Drew?
Colombian Drug Lord Blue.
Well, of course, so those of you who are watching this on YouTube,
Yeah,
can
there
see.
you go.
Can look at my brand new shirt, brand on today.
I say
What do you think?
Persian Prince.
Oh, Persian Prince or Colombian Drug Lord? Put in the comments.
Or am I a Persian carpet? Sweep that one under the carpet.
Your moustache is like,
That shirt looks like my last Saturday night.
Thank you, mate. Anyway, we better crack on. AD 64, the Great Fire of Rome began under the Emperor Nero. So, of course, in folklore, it says basically Nero fiddled as Rome burned. Generally, sort of put around, probably by Nero detractors, that he himself caused the fire. In some respects, it did a lot of good because it was took place in the poorer parts of Rome, and I think sort of very much like the Great Fire of London did, sort of
killed disease,
rats and nasty things and all that.
Bacteria.
Of course, the poor old Nero ended up, I think, committing suicide because the Senate basically said either you kill yourself or we're killing you.
Yep.
And he was going to be killed by whipping.
Oh, God, that'd be a way to go, wouldn't it?
Anyway,
So he slit his own throat, didn't he?
this is a place he got his servant to do it for him. In AD 180, and Callum and I have been to Carthage.
We have.
I remember playing table tennis with Callum on the deck of this boat.
Matt,
And
I loved playing table tennis with you when we went on that holiday. I remember at the start you would kick my ass, and by the end it was actually like having pretty good games.
And rowing in 90 degrees was like something else, wasn't it?
So cool.
Anyway, 6 inhabitants of Carthage were executed for being Christians. This is the earliest record of Christianity in Africa.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I thought so.
Yeah.
1536, the Pope's authority declared void in England by Henry VIII. Something quite upsets me, actually. So Walter Raleigh is somebody who's a bit of a hero of mine. Great Englishman, and he was arrested by forces of James I. I've never really understood why James I had it in for Walter Raleigh.
Infamy.
And, Walter Raleigh, was a great adventurer, one of the great Elizabethans, and, of course, ultimately he was executed, I think, about 20 years later.
Maybe it was almost like jealousy or something. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I am going to, by the time we do On This Week in History next week, I am going to tell you a bit more. This is an interesting one, I thought. 1743, the first half-page newspaper advert ever was published.
Wow.
In the New York Weekly Journal.
Oh, right.
So that's amazing. 1743. 1762, Catherine II, who obviously was Catherine the Great, became the Tsarina of Russia following the murder of Peter III. So I think actually, obviously Nicholas II was assassinated by firing squad, which we'll come on to later, I think. And I think one other Tsar was also assassinated. So Peter III was the other Tsar that was murdered. Catherine II is also, I think I'm right in saying, also very interesting because she wasn't Russian. I think she was actually an Austrian, if I remember rightly.
Oh, really?
And went on to become one of the great characters of history. You'd have to say, certainly European history. 1872. This is quite interesting, to think of this. So until 1872, elections weren't held in secret. So basically, if you voted, everyone knew, you were voting for the Conservatives or whatever. So in 1872, the Ballot Act introduced the secret ballot. Yeah.
Nice.
1892, the first human test of a vaccine against cholera.
Oh, nice.
A Ukrainian bacteriologist called Valdemar Havkine. And interestingly, he risked his own life because he tested it on himself.
But
That's
he
the
was
way to
fine,
do
was he?
it.
But he was fine.
Yeah, also,
nice.
He believed in it, so he did it.
He believed in it, so he sorry, I'm moving around there. He believed in it, so he did it. Yeah, that's the sort of thing you'd expect Drew to say, really, isn't it?
You got to believe in it to do it.
Final point before we get on to the next track, which is Tune Yards, is something that I know a lot about. So maybe my greatest hero of all time, other than Winston Churchill, is Mahatma Ghandi. In 1914, he left South Africa after successfully leading campaigns of passive resistance. So if you really want to, the film Ghandi, starring Ben Kingsley, maybe the most interesting part of the film, I think, is him in South Africa. Starts off him dressed in his lawyer's suit, because he just come back from London where he successfully practiced as a barrister. He sat in first class in South Africa. They basically, what are you doing in here, boy? Get out third class. Well, I'm a bloody lawyer and I've got a first class seat. No, you aren't. Basically kicked him out. And his bravery, what he did, he basically collected the coloureds, I suppose, as the South Africans would call them, the Asians, and basically encouraged them not to accept, what was tyranny, really. And there's one particular scene where the British Army cavalry rides at, I think it's about 500 protesters with Ghandi at the front, and one of them just says, "Lie down, the horses won't trample on you," and they didn't.
Yeah.
So they all lay down, the horses basically all
It's
reared
mad,
up
isn't it?
because they wouldn't actually. So check out the film. I wish I could. I think it's just called Ghandi.
It's called Ghandi, yeah.
Yeah, it's just called Ghandi. It's I've seen this film, unsurprisingly, about 20 times.
Wow.
I've seen it with you once, yeah.
It's just a brilliant film. So have a little bit of break now. 2 yards, and I'll catch you with the second part of On This Week History in a minute.
On This Week in History.
Welcome back to the second part of On This Week in History. I had the floodlights all over me. You'd think we were in Wembley Stadium with 83,000 people not practicing social distancing. None of them with face masks on. But because it's football, you're allowed to do that.
Yeah, for some reason.
What's that all about?
I don't know.
Yeah, you can't walk
But,
in the ring.
Might get shouted at by some lady in Marks and Spencer's, though.
Yeah, like I do, yeah. So, 1917. I think we discussed this in previous shows. So in 1917, there was a royal proclamation by George V, changing the name of the royal family from Saxe-Coburg-Gotha to Windsor. Why do you think that was, Drew? I have. So if you don't know this, I have told you before. So you get an extra smack on the bottom.
Because it would have looked not so good to have a German second name.
Because
didn't like the Germans.
Because of the war.
Because of the war, yeah, of course.
Yeah. This is 1917. And actually, just linking the two, so we do it in a minute. George V was obviously first cousin of Kaiser Wilhelm and also Tsar Nicholas II.
They're all related all over the world.
George V's policy at this time, about 1917, was largely driven by fear. So the royal family was very fearful that they would join, they would be usurped.
Just like Tsar Nicholas.
And that Britain would become a republic. And obviously, we were the third year into the bloodiest war in history. Hundreds of thousands of Britons had died. And basically the king sat there thinking, being called Saxe-Coburg-Gotha is not a very good idea. Of course, Callum, I think Callum knows this. So Earl Mountbatten, for instance, he was still called Battenberg, which apart being a very fine cake, was obviously
about Battenberg.
was a royal name and whatever.
Do you mind if I ask you a question, sir? Do you know why they chose Windsor?
No.
Oh, all right. I just wondered if
They named after the castle.
Oh, right. So the castle was named that first.
Yeah.
So they just okay. That's why then.
Yeah, I think I'm pretty sure of that. So 1918, one of the most disgraceful moments in history, and actually, if you read the full story, it's even worse. So the whole royal family of the Romanovs was executed by the Bolsheviks in a cellar in Ekaterinburg, which is in Siberia.
Wow.
All the girls were raped before they were executed. And I just sit there thinking it's just so unnecessary. I mean, if the Bolsheviks felt so insecure they had to execute the Tsar, that's one thing. But why they, why they had to be quite so. I mean, I just think
just nastiness.
Well, I don't understand. There's ideology, so. I don't know. So, mate, I don't agree with communism, for instance.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't want to go around killing all the communists.
No,
you see what I mean?
And you certainly wouldn't rape their daughters. Well,
it's just very uncivilized. And just linking, so I happen to know this. So linking right up until the last minute, Tsar Nicholas applied to come to Britain for asylum to escape. And, of course, George V said, yes, of course you can, cousin. And then he was so scared of public sentiment that he basically at the last minute said, no, you can't come. So
Do you know
It
what,
saved his life.
I actually think that's pretty bad on George V's part.
So actually, you could argue that George V effectively signed.
His death warrant.
That would be
Signed his
like
death warrant,
that would be
yeah.
like my cousin Emma or Jason asking me to protect them, and me going yeah, and then at the last minute just to save my own skin, or not, not even, they might not, nothing might have happened. But I think that's bad call.
Yeah, it is. It's very bad. 1923, the House of Lords accepts the new divorce law. So right up until that moment, it was actually very hard to get divorced. So we started to get some progressive stuff. I think this is the lot. Just trying to make my 3 bits of On This Week in History sort of go into equal chunks. So the last thing we're going to talk about, which is quite interesting, is in 1925, Adolf Hitler publishes Mein Kampf. Now, one of the things that's quite interesting, the original working title of Mein Kampf was something ridiculous like My Life Struggle Against Injustice and the Pain That Suffers in the World, or something like that. That's actually what the book was called.
Shorten it down a bit, mate, yeah.
No, it was, seriously.
Yeah.
That's actually what he was going to call it. Then someone said, hang on a minute, Alf, it's not a very catchy name.
Mein Kampf just means my struggle, doesn't it?
Something like that.
My struggle, yeah.
And he wrote most of this in prison. And of course, I don't know how many. It'd be interesting to see, but I don't know whether you could have a look it up for me, Drew. How many copies of Mein Kampf were sold? Certainly,
I know it's against the law in Germany to own a copy. If you buy Mein Kampf, it's a criminal offence in Germany. I don't know if it is anywhere else. Probably Austria as well. Makes sense, wouldn't it?
Well, I don't necessarily agree with that. I don't agree that you're right. I mean, I don't necessarily agree that you shouldn't be allowed to read something just because you don't agree with it. Do you know what I mean?
I guess there's 2 ways of looking at it. You could look at it as you could learn from it as like an important history thing and see what led to the war and learn from it. But I suppose the fear is it would cause some sort of like Nazi sentiment, or that far right groups would would treat it almost as like treasure or something. Glorify it.
85,000
Is that all?
in the UK.
In the UK.
Oh, okay.
I wonder, like,
I was thinking more about the worldwide, but
imagine being in the library just seeing
sorry,
Mein
no,
Kampf.
that was in 1 year, in 2017.
What?
wow,
85,000 people. Mein Kampf.
Anyway, so when we come back with the final part of On This Week in History, Drew will actually tell us how many copies of Mein Kampf have been sold. But I reckon we're talking millions, I would guess. So next, the wonderful Walker Brothers and Another Tear Falls.
Bringing you the news of old on This Week in History with Paul Waite.
Welcome back to On This Week in History. It's the final part of On This Week in History this week. Drew has now told us that up to 1939, 5.9 million copies were sold. About another 5 million over the war, and then a few million over the 50s, etc.
Yeah.
The last few years selling about 15,000 a year.
Yeah.
So, yeah, pretty scary. So, probably something like 15 million copies, maybe something that sort of number. So, got a few things on here I'm interested in, fortunately, because we've got quite a long time to talk for not that many facts. So, in 1942, a very shameful event in Vichy, France. We've talked a lot about Vichy, France on All This Week in History. So, in 1942, Transport 6 departs Vichy, France, with French Jews to the German concentration camps. So, this is the point. So, Marshal Pétain, etc., is all very well, maybe him doing a Chamberlain and saying, I've got to protect my people, but he then acquiesced in the murder
Sends them off
of
to
all
die.
the Jews.
Yeah.
So,
which were still French people. They just happened to be Jews.
I think that puts the blowing up of the French
I think
Navy into context.
No disrespect to any French listeners, but the actions from the French government during the Second World War was absolutely disgusting. Really,
Yes.
They actually had a bigger army at the beginning of the Second World War than Germany did as well.
Well, they did, yeah, that's right.
So
They
the fact
weren't
they
prepared
surrendered
for it.
so quickly was.
Anyway, 1951, one of the heroes of my father. So I've known about this man all my life, actually. Jersey Joe Walcott, one of the great boxers of all time. He became the oldest person to win the world heavyweight title in history at that time. At 37, he was.
Okay.
Of course, George Foreman became world champion when he was 46.
When he came out of retirement, he ended up fighting people like Vander Holyfield and stuff.
Something ridiculous.
Which is mad when he also fought people like Joe Frazier and Muhammad Ali. Different era.
Well, I think the thing, I will go to my grave thinking the Foreman Ali fight was a fix. Clearly, I mean, Foreman, in my opinion, Foreman is the person I would least want to fight in history, and I think he, on balance, if you said to me who is the greatest heavyweight boxer of all time, I would probably actually go George Foreman, then Lennox Lewis. Funnily enough, in that order.
I'd probably go Lennox Lewis first.
But I mean, what is the mark of how good Foreman was? When you consider that when he was a young man, he was just like was like a big Mike Tyson.
He was like Olympic gold medalist as well, wasn't he?
Yeah, like you imagine, how good Mike Tyson was, but you imagine like being like Mike Tyson, being as brutal,
being
as
like
him,
6 inches taller,
but being much taller and bigger.
6 inches taller, 5 inches
and
taller.
the fact that he, as a slow old man with no hair, he was able to beat the best
and a bit of a belly on him.
Yeah, the best people. Really shows.
Yeah, I think he only got beaten by Evander Holyfield, who himself is probably in the top 10 greatest heavyweights of all time.
Maybe.
So
1955, the first electric power was generated from atomic energy, sold commercially. Next, funnily enough, we were talking about this earlier, Callum. So 1971, Eddie Merckx wins his third straight Tour de France.
Right.
Now, what was amazing about this, and this probably won't mean a lot to you, so those of you who love cycling like I do will know the Tour de France is divided up into various classifications. So you have the main prize, which is obviously the yellow jersey, which is based on total time spent over all the stages. And usually the winner doesn't win by very much, maybe a minute or so. And then you have what's called the green jersey, which is points. So every day you can win points for winning sprints and things, and you get little sub-sprints during the day and all this. And then there's the young rider's jersey. I can't remember what the white jersey's for. There's a white jersey, and then there's the King of the Mountains, which is the polka dot jersey.
all right.
So you get so many points for stages. And so if you take... So something I'm very proud of, you won't know this, Mark Cavendish has won 2 stages in this year's Tour.
Oh, is it?
At the age of 36, whatever he is.
Fair play.
And he's now only 1 stage win away from winning the most stages of any person in history.
Wow.
Mark Cavendish has now won 33 stages of the Tour de France.
Not bad for a Manx guy.
Now, what's even more amazing is he didn't have a ride. So up until a week before this year's Tour, he didn't have a team, didn't have a ride, and then maybe who's considered the world's greatest sprinter got injured, and this team basically said... They took a leap of faith, and they basically said, this old bloke, Cavendish, he used to be the best, we'll go and sign him up. And look what happens. And he's repaid with two wins. But what was amazing about Eddie Merckx was not only was Eddie Merckx almost, I think beyond all doubt, the greatest cyclist of all time, and under any way of judging that, he also, not only did he win the Tour de France, he won the green jersey.
Wow.
He won the King of the Mountain. He won the most points. He won... You know what I mean? It was just unbeatable.
Wow, fair play.
Absolutely great. And I it's funny actually. I wasn't going to watch the Tour de France this year, but I've started watching it, and there's a wonderful new rider called Pogacar, who is maybe the best rider since Merckx.
Really?
Watched him riding on Saturday, and he just destroyed. It was just amazing fitness. And so for the first time for years, Pogacar was 5 minutes ahead of the second person, which has not been... So, like when Geraint Thomas won, he was literally like 10 seconds ahead and this sort of thing.
Yeah.
So we've unearthed another great at the moment. 1977, Vietnam becomes a member of the United Nations. This is scary, and I think, it's interesting on this, Callum. 1988, Flojo... sets a 100-metre world record for ladies, 10.49 seconds. Now, to put that in perspective, probably someone like Kathy Cook, who you would know, probably my idea of the greatest female Briton of all time. She used to run 11 seconds, non-druggy, so she was totally legit. So, to put this into context, Kathy Cook would have been, 4.5 metres behind Flojo. Yeah, if we're going to the maths.
Wow.
Now, what obviously Flojo ended up dying prematurely because of drug abuse and everything, what it did to her body. But the thing I was thinking about this the other day, actually, it doesn't stop the fact her body had to run that fast. Do you see what I mean?
Yep.
I mean, the fact she was helped unnaturally didn't get away from the fact that she still ran. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I sort of understand.
So I have a certain degree of respect for that, 1992, Slovakia declares independence from Czechoslovakia. Although it's interesting now when you watch programs and they ask like the Czechs and the Slovaks, who's your next favourite people? The Slovaks say the Czechs are, or the Czechs say the Slovaks are, which makes me laugh. 2012, Kim Jong-un is appointed supreme leader of North Korea. So all you North Korean listeners out there, like none. I can say what I like about him. So he's a complete nut bar. And finally today, gone way over my time, 2018, Cliff Richard wins his privacy case against the BBC. Absolutely shocking injustice and what the media at its worst. I can actually remember sitting in my chair watching the BBC with a helicopter outside, and of course it was all portrayed like he was some child molester and everything.
Weird.
So there we are. That was on This Week in History, and this is the... Who is it? Who is it, Drew? It's Aerosmith. Sorry.
Available now on iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and at AspenWaiteRadio.com.